A man, found at a train station, unable to remember who he is. A woman, struggling to stay strong in the midst of years of loneliness. And the past still burns between them like an unextinguished fire. What if it's not all just a coincidence? What if the stranger you call them is the deepest wound of your life? Sometimes the past hides behind a name, and sometimes forgiving is far harder than remembering. When the truths come to light, do you protect your heart, or do you choose the truth? This is not just a story of rescue. This is the story of lives lost and reborn from the ashes. Maya was a 25-year-old young woman. Life hadn't been easy on her. After losing her parents at a young age, she grew up in the gaps of the system. Relatives, orphanages, temporary stays. Eventually, she became friends with loneliness. She had learned not to trust anyone, not to be a burden to anyone. She had built a one-person fortress to survive. The stones of that fortress were night shifts, low-paying jobs, and a lot of silence. That night, as usual, she was tired and lost in thought. She had just finished her second shift at the desolate train station in the small town and was walking in the rain. She wore a thin coat and held a cheap cup of coffee, but the real burden wasn't on her shoulder, it was in her heart. She could barely pay her rent and was trying to make it to her cashier job at the supermarket. She didn't have any plans for the future because she didn't even know how she was going to get through the next week. But despite all of this, she still hadn't extinguished the small light inside her. As she reached the station's lamplight, her eyes fixed on something motionless. Just beyond the tracks, next to the wall of the station building, someone was sitting. Maya couldn't believe her eyes at first. In the rain, at midnight, a man. His head was down, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't moving. He was just there, abandoned, or perhaps forgotten. Maya hesitated. In times like these, her inner voice was always cautious. Don't get involved, just walk away. But then the man lifted his head. Their eyes met. That look was empty. No fear, no hope. Just a vast nothingness. "Hey, are you okay?" Maya asked. The sound of the rain nearly drowned out her question. The man moved his lips, but his voice came out weak. "I don't know," he said in a low tone. Who am I?" Maya's heart started to race. This man didn't know who he was, and he seemed truly lost not just in the city, but in his own mind as well. He was shivering. His clothes were covered in mud. A piece of old paper was hanging out of his pocket. Maya hesitated for a moment, then decided. She couldn't ignore a person with no one else. Because once, she had felt exactly the same way. "All right," she said gently. "You can't stay here. Come, let me take you to a warm place." The man didn't stop her. Maya reached out, and he slowly leaned on her shoulder. He was having trouble walking, but together they took steps. They moved silently through the wet streets. The yellow lights of the street lamps reflected off the droplets running off of them. With each step, a voice echoed in Maya's mind. "What are you doing? Why are you taking a man you don't know to your house?" But there was another voice too, a deeper voice. Because once, if someone had stopped and noticed you, everything could have been different. When they arrived at her small house, she let him inside. It was a modest, two-room house with a stove. As soon as she sat him on the couch, he nearly collapsed. Maya quickly found an old blanket, made hot tea from the kitchen. She tried talking to him, but the man just shook his head, occasionally staring into the distance. She left a few dry clothes for him to change into. When he took off his clothes, something fell out of his pocket wet, crumpled, a theater ticket. Maya bent down and picked it up. On the back of the ticket, there was a handwritten sentence. "Don't get off the stage before the play ends." A strange chill ran through Maya. This man clearly had a story in his past. Maybe a life so big, even she couldn't remember it. But now, he had no past, no name. And strangely, even in this state, he felt familiar to Maya. That night, as Maya closed her eyes on the blanket she had spread on the couch, she had no idea that the course of her life was about to change forever. But the man, he didn't sleep. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling. His lips moved, and he whispered something. "Maya?" Maya thought she heard her own name in her dream. Or maybe it was just the echo of her heart. But no one had said her name. At least, they shouldn't have. In the morning, the house was quiet. The pale daylight that crept in through the window gently spread across the cracks in the walls. As Maya started the coffee machine, she glanced at the man, or, for now, the stranger she called him. He was lying on the couch. He looked calm. But Maya knew that sometimes the peace on a person's face was just a mask for exhaustion. After a while, the man opened his eyes. When their gazes met, Maya smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. "How do you feel?" The man slowly lifted his head. There was still emptiness in his eyes, but it seemed like he was searching for something. "Strange," he said in a hoarse voice. "It's like I had a dream, but I'm still inside it." Maya pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "Do you remember anything?" The man tilted his head, thinking. He buried his fingers into the couch. "Just one word. Or maybe a name. Jonas." "Jonas." Maya paused for a moment. "Does that name sound familiar to you?" The man shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I'm Jonas. Maybe I was once. Or maybe someone told me this name." Maya thought to herself, "I kind of like this name." It sounded strong, but fragile. "All right, Jonas," she said with a slight smile. "Let's stick with that for now. At least you'll have a name until you get yourself together." Jonas nodded, as if hearing his name for the first time. And from that moment on, there was no longer a nameless man in Maya's small house, but someone called Jonas. As days passed, Jonas slowly began to recover. He fixed the old flower pots in the garden, repaired Maya's bicycle, and fixed the lamp in the house. He did small tasks, but with everything he did, he was opening a window into Maya's silent world. Maya realized she had grown accustomed to him, and it startled her. This man was still a stranger. His past was unknown, but she felt safe with him, and maybe that was a feeling she hadn't had in years. One morning, Liam, Maya's childhood friend and a former journalist, stopped by. Maya had mentioned Jonas to him, but didn't provide any details. Liam, with his usual curiosity, studied Jonas carefully. Then, he pulled Maya into the kitchen and whispered, "Are you serious? A man who doesn't even remember his name is living in your house?" Maya answered without looking away, "I don't know why, but I trust him. It feels like he was supposed to be here." Liam secretly took a photo of Jonas. "I'm going to look into this," he said. "We need to find out who he is. Maybe he's missing. Maybe he's someone we're looking for." Maya instinctively wanted to argue, but stayed quiet. There was a possibility Liam was right, and that thought began to tighten inside her. The next day, as Maya picked up the jacket Jonas had left on the couch, she noticed something fall out of the pocket. It was an old, yellowed envelope. There were 2 words written on it in shaky handwriting. "I want to be forgiven." A chill ran through Maya. Who was Jonas? What had he forgotten? And most importantly, who had he hurt? That night, as Maya looked at Jonas for the first time, she felt like she wasn't looking at a stranger, but at a question. And Jonas, sitting in the dark room, turned to Maya and quietly asked, "You're treating me like a good person, Maya. But what if I'm not a good person?" Maya stayed silent, because she didn't know the answer to that question either. But the one thing she did know was this: having a name didn't erase the weight of the past. But when someone calls you Jonas, it could give you a chance to start over. The morning dawned with a sky covered in gray. There was a light mist, the street lamp's light barely visible through the fog. Maya stood by the window, holding her tea. It was cool outside, but the warmth of the house didn't ease the turmoil inside her. The strange sense of peace she had been feeling lately was turning into restlessness. She didn't know exactly why, but every time she looked at Jonas, it felt like there was another man hidden behind his eyes. Jonas was still asleep, curled silently on the couch, breathing deeply and rhythmically. Maya watched him. His face seemed peaceful, but there were traces of someone fighting with their past hidden in his features. To Maya, this combination was both fascinating and unsettling. The phone rang, and Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was Liam. "I need to show you something," he said flatly. "I'll be at your place in 5 minutes." Maya didn't ask questions. The seriousness in Liam's voice was all the explanation she needed. 5 minutes later, Maya stood on her small porch with Liam. The fog still lingered, and the sound of a distant train mixed with the wind. Liam pulled out his phone and showed Maya the screen. "Don't be mad, but I took a photo of Jonas. I had it checked out missing person ads, police reports, whatever I could find. And this is what came up." The photo on the screen took Maya's breath away. It was him. But the name underneath was completely different. Julian Roderick. Missing. CEO. Construction scandal. 3 dead in a fire. And then vanished without a trace. Maya felt her head spin. She leaned against the porch post, her fingers cold to the touch. A shiver ran through her entire body. Is this real?" she whispered. Liam nodded. Unfortunately, this guy's past isn't clean. That fire. There was a big lawsuit years ago, but it was closed due to lack of evidence. Maya's mind went blank. She remembered the fire. That night, her mother was supposed to stay late at work. She was at the construction site. And the fire, that fire had started that night. No, Maya whispered softly. No, this can't be. Liam looked into her eyes. Your mom. She was working on that project, wasn't she? Maya's eyes blurred. Her throat tightened. Yes. They were silent for a long time. The wind lightly turned the wind chime on the porch. From a distance, a crow's caw echoed. Maya went inside. Jonas, or Julian, was sitting on the couch. His hands were clasped on his knees, and he was staring out the window. When he noticed her looking at him, he turned his head and gave a small smile. He looked so normal, as if he had an ordinary life, as if he hadn't left a dark mark in other people's pasts. But now Maya knew. That man had come with his past. That night, Maya didn't speak a word. Neither did Julian. There was an invisible wall between them now. They were in the same house, but in two different worlds. Maya couldn't sleep at all that night. She tossed and turned in bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Her mother's voice, her image, the silent scream of loss. Everything had come rushing back. But the thing that terrified her the most wasn't whether Julian was truly guilty or not. Her biggest fear was this. What if that man had a role in my mother's death? What if I've started to trust him, to love him? In the early hours of the morning, Maya, exhausted from lack of sleep, stumbled into the living room. Julian was sleeping. His blanket had fallen off, and sweat was beading on his forehead. He wasn't at peace in his sleep. His brows were furrowed. His lips were moving, murmuring words. Maya approached him. What she heard froze her in place. I tried to stop the fire. Sophia, Andrew, they set me up. Maya held her breath. Julian stirred but didn't wake up. In his dream, he wandered in the shadow of the past. Sophia? Who's Andrew? Maya wondered. And in that moment, she realized this man's past wasn't just about a fire. There was a web of secrets going deeper. Had someone silenced him? Maybe he hadn't run away. Maybe someone had tried to silence him. Maybe Julian was truly a victim. But one thing was clear to Maya. The truths were starting to awaken. And those truths were about to burn Maya's life once again. Outside, the rain had started. It was falling softly, and the drops hitting the window broke the silence inside. Maya sat on the old wooden chair in the corner of the kitchen, her hands clasped together. The exhaustion from the night before weighed heavily on her eyelids, but her mind hadn't quieted for a second. Julian was still asleep. But now, in Maya's eyes, he was no longer just a stranger. He was the man standing in the shadow of her mother's last breath. Or maybe he was the one who saved that breath. Breathing in this house without knowing which of these truths was real was slowly tearing Maya apart. The living room door creaked open. Julian entered. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. But there was something different in his eyes. He was more awake, more aware. Maya, he said cautiously, is there something you want to tell me? Maya looked up. Should I? Julian paused for a moment. He put his hands in his pockets. I've started having dreams. Fragments. Terrible ones. But they feel real. What are you seeing? Maya asked, her voice cold, yet cracked. Julian lowered his gaze. An office. A crowded meeting. Loud voices. Fire alarms. People running. And someone shouting at me. Stop. Don't. He fell silent. Maya waited. And then, you're there. But in a different way. You're small. You're crying. A woman is lying on the floor. Everything's dark. Smoke, so much smoke. Maya's hand trembled. Because what he described was her childhood. Though she didn't remember that night in full, pieces of it seemed to fall upon her from Julian's dream. Julian looked up. I know you, Maya, but I don't know from where. There's just a regret inside me about you, and it's keeping me awake. Maya stood up. Words that had been piling up inside her for years burned in her chest now. She spoke, breaking the silence. Because I'm the little girl who lost her mother that night. And you were at the center of that fire. Julian's face turned pale. He took a step back, as though struggling to stand. No, he whispered. No, I didn't start the fire. I know that. I know because I wanted to stop it. Then why couldn't you stop it? Maya yelled. Why did you stay silent? Why did you disappear? Why did no one pay for it? Julian closed his eyes. Because someone silenced me. That day, Maya left the house. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, not saying a word as she walked out. Julian didn't ask anything, didn't defend himself. He just stared as the door closed, swallowed by silence. Maya's absence filled the house, spreading an emptiness that covered the walls. Maya went to her mother's old house, the silent, musty, half-finished house she hadn't visited in years. Among the dust on the shelves, she found an old box, her mother's papers, notes, and inside, a yellow envelope. Inside the envelope, one name caught her attention: Sophia Caldwell, the woman from Julian's dreams, the project's financial coordinator. Maya's hands shook. There was a note, written in her mother's handwriting, attached to the corner. "This woman is rushing the project. I don't trust her." Maya closed her eyes. Everything was much more complicated than she had imagined. Maybe Julian was just a pawn. At the same time, Julian wasn't alone. He sat buried in the silence of the house, examining documents. In the inside pocket of his jacket, the files Maya had touched earlier still sat. He opened them, read through them, line by line. And finally, he came across a document, a confidential internal communication, signed by Andrew Keller. The heading read, "Fire drill to be conducted during exterior building cleaning. If a fire occurs, responsibility falls on the coordination team." Julian held his breath. In that moment, he remembered. He had never approved this document. But the signature was forged. His hands went to his head. He closed his eyes. They silenced me. Sophia and Andrew. The wind outside grew stronger. The rain beat against the windows. Maya folded her mother's letter and put it in her pocket. Julian buried his face in his hands. At the same time, they both spoke the same word, whispered, with wounded sincerity. "It's time to tell the truth." When Maya returned home, the sky was still dark. She lifted her eyes to the heavens. Broken stars flickered between the clouds, looking as tired as she felt. As she approached the house, her heart tightened in her chest, like a lump. She knew now that Julian remembered everything. But that wasn't the real issue. This was the truth. Maya remembered everything too. The night, buried between childhood memories, was no longer a hazy recollection, but an open wound. When she opened the door, Julian was standing by the window, looking out at the sky. His face was tired, but it wasn't a physical fatigue. It was the expression of a man carrying the weight of years. As Maya stepped inside, Julian turned toward her. Their eyes met. They shared a wordless but heavy moment. "I remember everything," Julian said, his voice fragile but clear. Maya nodded. "So do I." Julian stepped closer, handing Maya the papers he held. They were the so-called drill plans made before the fire. The signature wasn't his, but the name was falsely signed beneath it. "That day, I tried to stop the fire. The workers needed to be warned. The building should have been evacuated. But Sophia and Andrew told me not to delay the project. Things weren't going well. That day, we were supposed to have a drill, but the materials used on the building's exterior, they weren't fire-resistant. I said stop, but my voice was drowned out. And then," he paused. His throat tightened. "The fire broke out. Everything spiraled out of control. And I ran that night. Because I knew everyone would blame me. And maybe I really was guilty. I stayed silent. I was powerless. I was a coward." Maya's eyes filled with tears. The anger she had carried for years was slowly being replaced by another emotion rising inside her. Not pity, empathy. "For me, my mother's death was the end of everything. My father sank into silence after that. I was left alone. I always had one question inside me. Could that fire have been stopped? And now the answer is standing in front of me." Julian lowered his head. "I couldn't put out that fire. But now, I want to stop another fire. The one inside me, the one inside you, and the one inside this system." He looked up at Maya. "I won't run anymore." That day, with Maya's permission, Julian took the papers to the authorities. He spoke to the press. He announced his name as Julian Roderick once again, but this time, as a man facing his past, not running from it. An investigation was launched into Sophia and Andrew. For the first time in years, the silent files were reopened. It wasn't easy for Maya. Forgiving Julian didn't happen overnight. But his sincerity, his regret, and most of all, his effort to change, slowly melted the stones in Maya's heart. A few months later, Maya opened a small theater, just like her mother had always dreamed. It was small, simple, but it had soul. The first play on opening night was called Don't Get Off the Stage. And among the audience, sitting quietly in the back row, was a man. He wore a simple jacket, his hands resting on his knees, a shy smile on his face. It was Julian, but this time, he was remembered as Jonas. Because when Maya gave him that name, she had opened the door to a new life. At the end of the play, Maya stepped onto the stage, turned to the crowd, and paused for a moment. Then she said just one sentence. A person is not defined by their past, but the courage to face it redefines them. Julian lowered his eyes. Then, slowly, he lifted his head, and he looked at Maya. Maya smiled. There were still scars on his face, but now he carried them with the pride of a warrior. Life was continuing, together, rising from the ashes of the fire. If this story resonated with you, perhaps with your past or the power of forgiveness, you can support us by clicking the like button. We'd love to hear about moments in your life that were turning points in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss these deep, emotional, and inspiring stories. Every story has the potential to touch another person's heart. Maybe yours is just beginning right now.